Hail and well met, friends, and welcome to a video on a topic I really didn't expect to be substantial enough to warrant an entire video of its own, but sometimes you dig deep enough into something you think is going to be a non-topic and find that you've reached the Earth's mantle and the hole is so deep you can no longer see the surface. And I guess that's why I had to learn a bunch of things about dairy products for you. My aim was to think about some of the more unexpected culture shocks I had on moving from Canada to the UK, and in this case reverse culture shocks on visiting Canada after many years away, but it turns out something so innocuous and everyday that you wouldn't think was that different from one place to another as milk and its related produce gets complicated. Anyway. Basically, some time ago, I was speaking to someone from back home in Ontario, and the conversation somehow meandered into food chat, as it pretty much always does where I'm involved, and they lamented about how much trouble they had sourcing cream that didn't have additional stuff added to it. And I was like, cream has stuff added to it? Should have been a no-brainer that something was up when I came to the UK and found that cream comes in these little plastic pots with little peely tops and not cartons that you pour from. Like, I swear cream seems thicker here too, which is weird, right? Surely it's the same substance regardless. The milk to cream spectrum is just the stuff that comes out of a cow's teat in varying levels of fat content, right? Of course it's not that simple, silly, or I wouldn't be making a video about it. Okay, so I was kind of hoping that I'd be able to find a field with some cows in it, but this is as far as I've been able to travel out of town on foot without having to walk alongside a major A road, and I'm realizing belatedly that the two places in town where I've seen cows were out of town in the opposite direction, and like one time in Christchurch Meadow like 10 years ago. So this is probably a fool's errand. I really wanted to get some B-roll of cows for y'all, but I guess you'll have to settle for me standing in front of some field land. Maybe editing Sammy can work some post-production magic as well, I don't know. I do have a video clip somewhere of this one time I saw a cow here. It was in a cozy beer garden of all places. Oh no, it's in vertical! Oh well. Listen, I tried my best. I don't have a green screen either, or I'd superimposed myself on this extremely photorealistic landscape I painted in watercolor. Prints of this artwork are also available in my shop. Also, I keep getting interrupted by people walking their dogs, and while I am delighted to no end every time I get to see a doggy, maybe I should defer to Studio Sammy for the remainder, peppering in some semi-relevant scenic B-roll as we go. You know, I genuinely would love to be one of those YouTubers who just shows up in locations and talks to camera about things while standing in the middle of central London, or a field near Durham, or a warehouse outside Leamington Spa, but sadly, I am a shy little plum and utterly terrified of somebody coming up and asking about what I'm filming. Oh god, can you imagine? Even filming like B-roll that I'm not in when I'm out and about and the world makes me nervous. But I digress. So back in Canada, fairly standardly, you'll find whipping cream, which can contain somewhere between 33 and 36% milk fat. Then there's table cream, which contains 18% milk fat, and after that comes the most popular choice for coffee drinks, which is half and half, which sits roughly halfway between table cream and a glass of milk at a modest 10% milk fat. You might also find light cream weighing in at a diminutive 5%, barely more than the 3.25% you find in whole milk, or as it's marketed in Canada, homogenized milk, or often shortened to homo milk. Also, milk comes in bags in some parts of Canada, and I'd say let's put a pin in that for now, but if I did, I'd spill milk all over the video. In the UK, cream comes standardly as double cream, which I learned while making this video contains a whopping 48% milk fat, which would explain why it's so delicious whipped into soft peaks over a bowl of strawberries. And then whipping cream comes in at a respectful 35%, and single cream at 18%. A few things worth noting here. The United Kingdom, as a people, do not tend to put cream in coffee. But coffee culture has just historically developed differently here, I think. I don't think those automatic drip filter machines were ever as ubiquitous here as they were back in Canada. And you'd be hard-pressed to find a UK-based chain coffee shop that does really much in the way of filter coffee at all. You should see the confused looks on North American tourists' faces walking into a Costa Coffee and asking for a large coffee with cream, because we don't do that. You can find some solid batch brews and pour over filter coffees at specialty coffee shops, of course, but those are a far cry in both character and price from the glass jug that's been stewing on a hot plate waiting for you to order your large double-double. And also, largely within the last 20 years or so. Mostly you'll find espresso-based beverages, and if we have them with dairy, it's milk. If we have filter coffee with dairy, like I do with my B60 and AeroPress at home, also milk. Maybe because those thicker creams just don't stir as well into coffee, and anything above a splash of single cream will kill all the flavor and texture of anything less than the most burnt of dark roast coffees. I don't know. And we absolutely do not put cream in tea. Personally, I like to know that there's tea in my tea, but hey, you do you, buddy. Whatever makes you feel good. I'm over 40, so my doctors advised me to be careful about keeping my cholesterol in check, and the good news is I was already a skimmed milk enjoyer, so I have no changes to make. So there's literally nothing left for me to cut down on. What do you want from me? Oh my god! That being said, I also developed a lactose intolerance a few years ago, which has made life ever so much more fun as a milk enjoyer. But I digress. And I think that sort of explains the difference in general cream packaging as well. Cream comes in horrible cartons back in the old country, whereas here it comes in plastic pot sealed with sort of film you peel back and then get annoyed that it's in no way resealable, and they've stopped including lids with products like these in order to save on plastic, and this is, I'm sure, no way a cost-saving measure on the part of dairy manufacturers masquerading as concern for the environment. There is no greenwashing here at all. My point is, it just doesn't make sense that you'd buy a dairy product in an unresealable container that you plan to have round for just putting a splash in your morning coffee and then letting it hang out unenclosed in your fridge for upwards of probably a week. Especially since it just also seems to go off a lot faster here. So what's the deal with the difference between Canadian cream and British cream then? Why does Canadian cream have additional gubbins on the ingredients list that you don't find here in the UK? Why is Canadian cream thinner and pourable at the same milk fat content as British cream that's thicker and will fight you a bit if you do try to stir it into your coffee? And is there actually any reason to be bothered about whether there's stuff added to their dairy cream? Turns out, it all comes down to one of the greatest innovations of milk making in all of human history. Pasteurization. You've probably heard of it. I hope you've heard of it. And if this is your first time hearing about it, I'm glad that you're hearing about it. It's great. So here's the thing. Unpasteurized milk, or milk as it used to be known, is really, really good at becoming a hotbed for all kinds of nasty microbes, bacteria, and pathogens. Even before we had names for these things, we knew that there was a really good chance that milk that you didn't do anything to would make you sick if you let it sit for more than 5 minutes. You know, those itsy bitsy bad guys, so small you can't see with the naked eye, but they will make you really, really unwell if you're not careful. You might have heard of some of them. They often have cool names like Listeria and Salmonella and Campylobacter, diphtheria, and my personal favorite, tuberculosis. Pasteurization kills off the overwhelming majority of these little nasties, which means we can safely enjoy dairy products without fear of taking our life into our hands every time we do it. Unless I forget to take a lactase tablet personally, though thankfully that just decimates my digestive system for a day or so, which isn't pleasant, but it's still better than, you know, severe illness and an extremely painful death. Thanks, pasteurization! Hey folks, Editing Sammy here. As I was editing this, I realized I wanted to add a little bit of additional context and detail to this segment than in my original take. So I guess this is a segment within a segment of our Flag Means Facts. People have known about the practice of heating foods to certain temperatures in order to increase their longevity and safety since at least 12th century China, where it was done with wines. But it wasn't until the late 19th and into the early 20th century that pasteurization of milk became a more widespread practice. Interestingly, Louis Pasteur, whose name you may recognize from the name of the process that's named after him, he was originally thinking about wine when he conceived of his specific processes, but they clearly apply themselves very well to milk as well, among other things. It wasn't actually until the late 19th, early 20th century that pasteurizing milk really came into widespread practice and is now, in many cases, mandatory. Pre-industrially, you were just more likely to have access to fresh milk. Either you lived in a rural area and maybe you had a cow or there was a cow nearby, so the milk that you were drinking was, you know, pretty freshly out of a cow's teat, and didn't have a chance for all those nasty microbes and stuff to grow quite so much. That being said, some of them still did, and people probably got sick and died and didn't know why. Surprise! Cows were even kept in cities so that people in urban environments had access to fresh milk, because it just didn't keep for very long. Even in the 18th century, there was also a practice of scalding cream specifically to keep your butter from spoiling a little bit longer. But certainly, starting in the late 19th, early 20th century, and then obviously going on into the 20th and the 21st century, it is very much de rigueur and, honestly, pretty darn necessary that we pasteurize our milk. So yeah, that's the deal with pasteurization. It's great, and now you know. Okay. All milk available for sale in Canada is pasteurized, as is the vast majority in the UK, except under very strictly controlled circumstances, except in Scotland, where the sale of unpasteurized milk is illegal. Good for you, Scotland. But methods of pasteurization can vary, and while they're all effective at killing off a sufficient percentage of nasties to make your milk safe to consume, these methods can have minor effects on the end product, especially in higher fat items like cream. They did not make it easy for me to figure out how the only brands of cream I could find in my parents' local supermarkets were pasteurized, especially not being able to actively peruse the aisles of their local supermarkets with this question in mind, because I'm very far away, and weirdly enough, I don't have the budget to fly to Canada just for the purposes of one YouTube video. But what I did find was this one photo online that shows this specific side of a cream carton, which had the one piece of information I needed. And that piece of information was the three little letters, UHT. The standard pasteurization method of dairy products is the HTST, or high temperature short time method, which involves heating the milk to 72 degrees Celsius, holding it at that temperature for 15 seconds, and then rapidly cooling it back down, which is sufficient to kill off the vast majority of the little nasties in there and thereby also extends the shelf life of the product. UHT, or ultra high temperature pasteurization, on the other hand, heats the milk way up to 138 degrees Celsius for only 2 seconds. This results in a significantly extended shelf life. You know those cartons of shelf-stable milk you can buy at room temperature, or those little single-shot plastic potos they give you with your coffee in hotel rooms? Those can sit in a sealed container for months because they've been UHT treated. With milk, the trade-off is that heating it to that high of a temperature can have a bit of a more pronounced impact on the overall flavor of the milk, leaving you with a milk drink that lacks that fresh taste you're probably looking for if you're the kind of person who just, like, drinks a whole glass of milk for fun. And your bones must love you. But there's more to it than that when it comes to a higher fat product like cream. Namely, when it's been processed at that high of a temperature, it becomes harder for the cream to retain its homogeneity. That is, it's more likely for the fat in the cream to want to separate out from the water rather than remaining in emulsion. That's why extra ingredients are added. You don't want a carton of cream that's got a layer of super thick, fatty gubbins floating over a pool of, like, skimmed milk water. At least I assume you probably don't. I don't. That sounds nasty. Anyways, to prevent this, stabilizers are added. Here are some of the most common stabilizers I've found and what they're made of and what they do. Sodium citrate is just the salt form of citric acid, which has several uses in food, including as an emulsifier. That is, a substance that helps other substances stick together that would otherwise be inclined to separate, like fat and water. It's also what gives processed cheese slices their distinctive gooey meltiness. Sodium phosphate is another similar emulsifier, and carrageenan, which comes from red seaweed, is a thickener and stabilizer, which also helps to keep that sweet, sweet emulsion in check until you're ready to pour a generous slug of cream over your morning Timbits cereal if you wanted to do that for some reason. Also, it turns out that you can buy Timbits in cereal form now. Canada has changed so much since I moved away. The past is a foreign country, etc., etc. I can still remember when Special K was good. And now I'm sad again that they closed the last facility making the old recipe of it like 10 years ago. This is a normal thing to be sad about. What's the point of all this? I don't know. I just thought it was neat. Also surprisingly difficult to gather any information on. I also noticed that the big cartons of milk at my parents' house seem to go off way slower than the ones we buy here in the UK, and various random internet people have theories as to why this is the case, but despite various assertions on Reddit, I don't think it's because of what they feed on, or because Canadian dairy farmers are just that much better at taking care of their cows than British farmers, because all of that is fairly similar. And more to do with the fact that it's just microfiltration of the milk, which does extend its shelf life a decent amount, and seems to be more common in the milks you find in Canadian supermarkets. You can find it here as well, but I don't know who buys it because it's also more expensive, and why bother when you can just buy as much milk at a time as you think you'd get through in like 5 days or less. Also, my parents' fridge is just so much bigger and better than my British fridge, so it's more economical to buy big cartons of stuff and know that it's gonna be fine there for like a week or two, and it'll actually fit in your fridge. Like, I could buy Crave and Dale, other brands are available probably, but in this economy, you cannot be serious. Hell, the first flat I lived in the UK had a fridge so tiny and so shitty that I had to snap a frozen pizza in 2 half moons to get it to fit in there, and if the outside temperature went over 24 degrees, the tiny little motor in that thing struggled to maintain a temperature much colder than just keeping my poor little milk jug out on the countertop. The amount of food I had to bin that year was, being poor is expensive. Like, if you want a really obvious indicator that Canadian fridges on average must have a greater capacity than the pokey little hotel fridges you find in so many British flats and houses, it's actually plant milk. Basically everything here comes in increments of 1 liter tops. But last time I was in Canada, I found it such a struggle to find an oat milk that wasn't almost twice as much as that. And considering that I was going to be the only person in the house drinking oat milk, I didn't want to burden my parents with food waste, you know what I mean? So, yeah, that sucked. Anyways, I'd have been really curious to know if there was a discernible difference in the terroir of British milk versus Canadian milk, but unfortunately it's kind of impractical to do a side-by-side comparison of the two, since any milk I could try to bring to my parents' house in Ontario from my house in Oxfordshire would have been out of the fridge for like the better part of a day, and therefore not necessarily its best, unless I brought an unopened carton of shelf-stable milk, which kind of defeats the purpose because everyone agrees that shelf-stable milk isn't as good. But regarding the taste of fresh Canadian dairy versus fresh British dairy, I don't think there's a discernible difference. Even if there might be, if one had the wherewithal to side-by-side compare, say, a glass of skimmed milk or a spoonful of whipped cream, with or without carrageenan, who cares? I'm realizing there really isn't a meaningful conclusion to this video other than the fact that even basic staple foods can vary slightly from one place to another because the context and culture is a little different. Both of these things are fine. I didn't film the making of this cake that you're seeing, and I didn't plan to share a recipe with this video at all. It just so happened that I was making a Black Forest cake of sorts because it was our wedding anniversary, and this is the cake we had at our wedding, and I like to make it to celebrate our marriage because it's our favorite and we love each other. I'm using double cream here instead of whipping cream because it's delicious, and I really wish there was anything about cream that was good for me. But sometimes, despite the lactose and saturated fat and sugar and stuff, it's good for your soul, you know? This cake makes me happy. Cream is delicious. Carrageenan is just seaweed slime, but less gross than that makes it sound. Like and subscribe and buy my art and enjoy the random exclusive stuff I put on Patreon if you want to. You know the deal. I'm just glad you watched this video at this point. I realize it's been a while, and I've missed doing it, and I'm realizing that perfect is the enemy of done. So here's my video. That was my video. And if you're still here for some reason, I would like to thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a splendid day. And I'm gonna keep drinking my dairy-free mint tea.